Colonel Thomas Tom Callahan was no stranger to long journeys. At 85 years old, he had walked through more war zones than airports and carried the weight of memories heavier than any suitcase. A Medal of Honor recipient whose valor in the jungles of Vietnam had become part of military legend, Tom was, to most who passed him in an airport terminal, just another elderly traveler, stooped slightly from decades-old injuries, moving with quiet deliberation, dressed in modest slacks, a collared shirt, and a time-worn sports coat. His eyes, though dulled by age, still held the keen glint of a warrior who had once stared down chaos and chosen courage. He was not a man who sought recognition. The medal, along with its ornate citation, stayed folded in his wallet, more relic than emblem, more memory than accolade. But today's journey was different. Today, he was traveling to Washington, D.C., at the invitation of the White House itself, to attend a national ceremony honoring living recipients of the Medal of Honor. It was a rare event, and his granddaughter, Sarah, a young Army captain cut from the same cloth, had insisted he attend. She had cashed in all her frequent flyer miles and dipped into her own savings to purchase him a first-class ticket aboard Trans-Global Airlines Flight 714. "You deserve to be comfortable, Grandpa," she had said, and her words stayed with him as he navigated the bustle of the terminal that morning. The airport swirled around him in its usual rhythm, anxious families, business travelers glued to their devices, a wall of announcements echoing overhead. Tom moved through it with practiced grace. Security had waved him through with quiet respect, his name flagged in their system as a decorated veteran. He made his way to Gate C-12 and waited in the priority line, his ticket, confirmed months ago, promising him Seat 2A, a spacious window seat in first class. That's when the ordinary became the call to adventure. "I'm sorry, sir, but due to an equipment change, we've had to reassign some seats. Your new boarding pass is for 32B, middle seat, economy," said the gate agent, Brenda, her voice perfectly polished, her tone a blend of corporate indifference and performative apology. Tom blinked. "There must be a mistake," he said calmly, showing her his original ticket. Brenda didn't look up. "Aircraft changes happen," she said. "32B is your assigned seat." Just like that, his long-anticipated journey began not with honor, but with quiet humiliation. He didn't protest. He'd fought wars over greater injustices than this. But as he looked at the flimsy new boarding pass, economy, middle seat, back of the plane, he felt a weariness settle deep in his bones. Not for the discomfort, but for what it represented. The erasure of recognition, the substitution of algorithms and loyalty status over human dignity. The systems he had once defended had forgotten him. Or perhaps they had never truly remembered. Still, like all great heroes at the beginning of their path, Tom accepted the challenge quietly, without fanfare. He found a seat near the gate, far from the boarding queue, and watched. Watched as others, men in business suits, families with loud children, Diamond Elite frequent flyers, filed into the first-class cabin he had once been meant for. He watched with the stillness of a man who had waited out worse storms. Yet within him stirred something else, a memory of his granddaughter's words, and a small card she had tucked into his wallet. A direct number for Trans-Global's Heroes Liaison. A lifeline, perhaps. A talisman. He hadn't intended to use it. But now, with nothing left to lose, he reached into his coat. It would be the first step on a path he didn't know he was walking, a path that, within minutes, would shake the very foundations of a global airline and remind the world that true honor does not fade with age, nor does it tolerate quiet insult. Tom Callahan was about to embark on a different kind of journey, one not through air, but through the heart of a system that had lost its way. A hero's journey, rekindled not by sword or battle, but by a phone call and the unwavering power of dignity. Tom sat quietly in the hard plastic chair near Gate C-12, his cane resting against his leg, the new boarding pass, 32B, trembling slightly between his fingers. Around him, the airport moved on unbothered. The boarding process had begun. First-class passengers were already walking down the jet bridge, their shoes clicking across the floor, their carry-ons pulled behind them like obedient pets. Somewhere, someone was laughing. Someone else was arguing over overhead bin space. But in Tom's world, everything had slowed to a silence only he could hear. The silence that came just before the mission changed. He wasn't angry. Not in the way some people get when flights are delayed or coffee orders are wrong. No, this was something deeper. The quiet, cold sting of dignity being misplaced. He thought of Sarah, of how proud she'd been when she handed him that ticket. "You've earned this, Grandpa," she'd said. And now, here he was, middle seat, last boarding group, as if all those years in the jungle, all the medals, all the wounds, none of it had mattered. But heroes don't dwell. They adapt. They move forward. Tom reached into his wallet, found the card Sarah had given him, and dialed the number. "Trans-Global Airlines, Heroes Liaison Office, this is Marcus," came the voice on the other end. Tom introduced himself, slowly, deliberately. He explained what had happened. Marcus listened, the line going quiet except for the tapping of keys. Then, "Sir, we're seeing your original seat in 2A. That should not have changed. Let me make some calls." Minutes passed. The boarding continued. Tom waited. It felt like waiting for air support that might never come. Then, just as the agent called for Group 7, Marcus returned to the line. "Mr. Callahan, I need to be honest with you. There was a systems override. Your seat was reassigned manually. It wasn't a mistake, it was a downgrade. The gate agent moved you for another passenger." The words struck like a mortar shell. Not random. Not an error. A choice. Someone had looked at his name, his age, perhaps even his appearance, and decided he was expendable. Tom closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered being 22, his unit pinned down in a bamboo thicket, radioing for extraction while mortars dropped around them. Back then, he'd had no guarantee of rescue, just faith that someone would do the right thing. But this time, the cavalry wasn't coming, unless he called them. "Can you patch me through to someone higher?" he asked. "Someone who can see what this really is." Marcus hesitated. "Yes, sir. Give me a moment." A few transfers later, Tom was speaking with a woman named Carla Chong, Vice President of Customer Integrity, a title that sounded like armor, but came with the wary tone of someone used to putting out fires. She apologized profusely, said things like, "unacceptable and not representative of our values," promised to investigate. But when Tom asked whether the decision would be reversed before the plane departed, she faltered. "We've already boarded most of the flight. The seat's been taken." "It's complicated." "Complicated," Tom repeated, tasting the word like sand in his mouth. And then something shifted. He could have let it go. Sat in 32B, closed his eyes, endured the 5-hour flight with shoulders cramped and knees knocking against a tray table. That would have been the easier road, the quiet one. But heroes don't retreat when they see injustice, even if the battlefield is a boarding gate and the enemy is indifference. Tom stood up, walked slowly but steadily to the podium, and requested to speak to a supervisor. The gate agent, Brenda, sighed, eyes already glazing over. "Sir, we've gone over this." "No," Tom said, his voice low but unwavering. "You haven't. And you will." He placed his Medal of Honor citation on the desk, not the medal, just the paper, yellowed and creased from years in his wallet. He said nothing else. Passengers nearby stopped what they were doing. Phones began to rise. Whispers spread. Within minutes, the terminal shifted. It was no longer just about a seat. It was about what that seat represented. Respect. Recognition. The difference between a system that says thank you for your service and one that actually means it. The supervisor arrived. Then a regional manager. Then, eventually, a public relations director flying standby on another flight. Each tried to explain. Each tried to deflect. But Tom didn't need to raise his voice. He simply waited, standing firm, his presence alone indicting everything around him. The truth was now undeniable. A decorated war hero had been bumped from first class not by accident, but by a choice, one made in the service of convenience or privilege. And in that moment, as camera flashes blinked and journalists began to tweet, it became clear. This would not be forgotten. Tom Callahan had become a symbol. Not of rage, not of protest, but of something rarer, unshakable quiet honor in the face of loud indifference. The ordeal was no longer just his. It had become the inciting incident in a larger journey, one that would test not only his resolve, but the moral compass of a nation that too often says it honors its heroes, but forgets to act like it. At first, the reaction of the airline staff to Tom's quiet protest was routine, automatic, an almost mechanical reflex born from years of corporate scripts and customer containment. Brenda, the gate agent, didn't look up from her screen when he first approached the counter again. Her fingers moved with the practiced rhythm of someone who had handled hundreds of boarding passes and twice as many complaints. To her, he was just another wrinkle in an otherwise smooth operation. "Sir, we've already completed boarding. Please return to your assigned seat." Tom didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or pound his cane against the floor. Instead, he set his cane aside carefully, reached into his pocket, and placed the worn, folded citation of his Medal of Honor on the counter, deliberate, respectful, and completely out of place in the sterile corporate space of the airport. Brenda glanced down, then back up, still unmoved. "I'm sorry, but I can't make changes this close to departure." Tom simply looked at her, not with anger, but with the calm, steady gaze of a man who had once stood between chaos and those under his protection. That look, the one that said, "I've seen worse than this, and I didn't back down then," cut through her indifference more than any words could. Something shifted in her. A flicker of uncertainty. Still, she followed protocol. She called her supervisor, a man named Darren, who approached with the clipped gait of someone used to putting out fires fast and moving on faster. He offered the same phrases Tom had already heard. "We apologize. This was not our intent. We'll look into this after the flight." His hands moved constantly, adjusting his lanyard, tapping his tablet, motioning to other staff. He was solving the problem around Tom, not with him. But Tom didn't budge. He stayed exactly where he was, cane by his side, eyes steady, the citation still resting on the counter, like an open question none of them wanted to answer. Passengers began to take notice. A few whispered. One younger woman pulled out her phone and began recording quietly. The energy at Gate C-12 changed. No longer was this just a delay, it was a reckoning. An old man in a pressed jacket, forgotten by the algorithms of modern convenience, standing still while the world tried to move past him. Darren felt it too. He glanced at Brenda, then at the crowd. His voice lowered. "Mr. Callahan, I want to make this right. We'll credit your ticket. We'll offer a voucher. We'll ensure this doesn't happen again." Tom gave a quiet nod but asked a single question. "Who made the call to move me?" Darren hesitated. His eyes darted toward the terminal doors, as if calculating whether there was still time to shut this down quietly. "That information isn't available at this time," he said, words carefully chosen. "It may have been an automated system, or—" Tom raised a hand gently, not to interrupt but to halt the spin. "You and I both know it wasn't automated. Someone looked at that manifest and decided I didn't belong up there." The air thinned. Darren's face hardened, not in defiance, but in defeat. The truth had broken through, and there was no more script to follow. Carla Chong appeared shortly after. No blazer, just a company badge clipped to her belt and tired eyes that had seen too many corporate crises. She walked with the weariness of someone who understood that this wasn't just about a seat anymore. She didn't offer excuses. She didn't mention policies or upgrades or points. Instead, she looked at Tom's citation, then at the man himself, and said, "I'm sorry. We failed you." The words were simple, but sincere. They carried weight because they didn't try to explain away the injustice, they acknowledged it. But the journey didn't end there. Because while Carla's apology was real, it came only after Tom had made them stop and see. The staff, for all their roles and responsibilities, had moved like gears in a machine, until one man's quiet refusal to accept disrespect disrupted the system. They hadn't seen him at first. Not really. To Brenda, he was a late boarding, seat-confused passenger. To Darren, he was a potential PR issue. Even Carla, arriving with the best intentions, had come because of pressure, because people were watching. It was only when Tom made them pause, made them truly witness who he was, not just what he represented, that the tide began to shift. And so, the reaction of the airline staff became part of the hero's journey, not as allies or mentors, but as reluctant gatekeepers of a world that often forgets its own promises. They weren't villains, not exactly, but they were part of the trial, obstacles that had to be faced, not just for justice in that moment, but for something larger, the dignity owed to those who have sacrificed. In the end, their responses weren't just about one man. They were a mirror held up to a system that says thank you for your service with words, but too rarely with action. And when that system was forced to stop, to look, to feel, just for a moment, it revealed something that could not be unseen. Tom had never been one to ask for help. He had lived through decades of hardship, from the jungle trails of Vietnam to the long, quiet nights of civilian life, where medals gathered dust in drawers and memories surfaced only in dreams. But now, at Gate C-12, surrounded by curious onlookers and corporate uniforms, he realized this moment wasn't just about himself. If dignity could be stripped away so quickly by a misclick or a misjudgment, then so could it happen to others, men and women who no longer had the strength to push back. With a quiet sigh, Tom reached into his pocket and retrieved a small, dog-eared card. It was from the airline's Special Services Department, given to him years ago after a clerical mix-up with his medical accommodation. It wasn't much, just a name and a number, but it was a thread to pull when the machinery failed. And today, the machinery had failed. He dialed the number, his fingers shaking slightly, more from weariness than anger. After several rings, a voice answered, calm, practiced, polite. American Airlines Special Services, this is Maria speaking. How can I assist you today? Tom spoke plainly, with the same economy of language he used on the battlefield. Clear, direct, no embellishment. He told her about the reassignment, about being moved from first to a tight seat in the back row, about the cane and the citation and the silence he had received in response. Maria didn't interrupt. She listened, and something in her voice softened as he continued. He didn't beg. He simply explained. Mr. Callahan, she said after a pause, I'm so sorry. I see your profile here. You're noted as a veteran and a special accommodation passenger. There's no record of an exception request. You were flagged for downgrade due to a last-minute reallocation, but that should not have happened. Tom closed his eyes for a moment. The words confirmed what he had feared. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been a decision, even if a thoughtless one. I'll escalate this, Maria said. Right now. And I'll stay on the line until someone comes to speak with you directly. Within minutes, things began to move. A different tone emerged at the gate, a tension in the staff, as new names were called over radios and quiet apologies were murmured into headsets. Brenda and Darren were no longer in charge. Someone higher was pulling the strings now. A woman in a navy suit with silver pins on her collar arrived, brisk but composed. Her name was Angela. She introduced herself to Tom and extended her hand, not as a formality, but as a gesture of respect. Mr. Callahan, I just spoke with Maria. I'm here to correct this. Tom nodded, unsure of what correct meant anymore. But Angela didn't offer platitudes. She looked him in the eye. We have a first-class seat ready. It's yours. The passenger who has moved into your seat will be rebooked. That wasn't the victory. That was just a reversal of the wrong. What mattered more was what came next. Angela asked how else she could assist. Not because she had to, but because she now saw him, not as a problem, not as a complication, but as a person whose experience mattered. She offered to have a wheelchair ready at arrival. She asked if he needed help with a connection. She even asked if he wanted to file a formal report. And for the first time that day, Tom saw the machine pause, not to crush him, but to listen. He declined the report, though. I just want it not to happen to the next guy, he said. And that was the moment the hero's journey shifted again. He had crossed the threshold when he refused to accept disrespect. He had faced the trials of bureaucracy and indifference. And now, with Maria's unexpected allyship and Angela's visible change of heart, he had found what all heroes seek, not glory, but recognition, not power, but justice. As he boarded the plane, escorted now with care, cane steady in one hand and pride unbroken in the other, Tom carried more than just his ticket. He carried the knowledge that the journey wasn't his alone. Others would walk this path. Others might not have the strength or voice. But today, because he stood still when it mattered, the path had shifted, if only a little. And sometimes, that's all a hero needs to do. Tom's journey seemed to be reaching its climax, but just as the air grew thick with resolution, a new presence made itself known. The company's chairman, a figure who rarely surfaced on the front line of customer conflicts, but whose intervention would turn the tide in a way no protocol manual could foresee. The chairman had been alerted by an urgent message, a ripple sent through the airline's network, flagging a veteran mistreated in plain sight, a story growing fast in the digital buzz and whispers of those watching. With the measured calm of a man who understood that true leadership is tested in moments of crisis, he arrived at the gate, his steps confident but unhurried, an embodiment of authority and empathy combined. He didn't storm in with demands or accusations. Instead, he scanned the scene quietly, observing the tense faces, the lines of discomfort, the mixture of frustration and embarrassment in the staff's eyes. Then, turning to Tom, he offered a nod, not just an acknowledgement, but a recognition of the years of silent sacrifice behind that stoic gaze. The chairman's voice was steady and low, carrying the weight of responsibility, but also a promise of change. "Mr. Callahan," he began, "what has happened here is unacceptable, and I personally apologize for it. No one who has served this country should ever be made to feel diminished, especially not by those who owe their jobs to the freedom you defended." He took immediate command, speaking directly into radios and phones, cutting through layers of bureaucracy as if wielding a sword forged in decades of experience. Staff who moments before had been unsure and defensive now stood straighter, their roles clear under the presence of this unexpected champion. The chairman ensured the correct accommodations were reinstated without hesitation: the first-class seat, the priority boarding, the assistance through the airport. But beyond the practical, he did something more profound. He promised an internal review, a commitment to prevent such an incident from ever repeating, turning Tom's personal ordeal into a catalyst for systemic change. As the crowd of onlookers felt the shift, a palpable sense of respect rippled through the gate area. The chairman's intervention was not just a correction. It was a signal to everyone present that dignity and honor were not negotiable, no matter the pressures or cost. For Tom, this moment wasn't about gratitude or recognition. It was the final proving ground of his journey, a call to witness that the battles fought outside the public eye could finally be acknowledged within the systems meant to serve. When the chairman stepped back, leaving Tom with a firm handshake and a sincere smile, it was clear the story had moved beyond one man's struggle. It had become a story of accountability, leadership, and the enduring power of respect. Tom boarded the plane with the chairman's words echoing in his mind, a reminder that heroes don't always wear medals in the light. Sometimes, they stand firm until justice finds them, even if it takes the highest voice to finally speak their truth. The moment the airline president personally intervened at Gate C-12 marked more than just a quick resolution. It became the catalyst for profound transformation within the airline's culture and policies. What had begun as a single act of neglect spiraled into an awakening, a moment when the rigid machinery of corporate procedure met the unyielding spirit of honor and duty. In the days that followed, the story of Colonel Thomas Callahan's downgrade and the president's swift response rippled far beyond the airport terminal, touching veterans' networks, social media, and every corner of the company itself. Within Trans-Global Airlines, the incident sparked an urgent reckoning. Leadership convened with a renewed sense of purpose, recognizing that the failure to honor a Medal of Honor recipient was not merely an isolated mistake, but a symptom of deeper systemic flaws. The Callahan Protocol was born from this crucible, a new policy mandating immediate, highest-level escalation for any service issues involving Medal of Honor recipients and similarly distinguished veterans. This protocol was not just bureaucratic wording. It embodied a promise etched in respect and responsibility, ensuring no hero would ever face the indignity of being overlooked again. The ripple extended to training programs, where gate agents and frontline staff underwent intensive retraining focused not only on the letter of the rules, but on the spirit of empathy and genuine human respect. The agents involved, Brenda and Mark, faced the consequences of their actions and inactions, underscoring the airline's commitment to accountability. Brenda was reassigned to a role away from customer-facing duties, while Mark, who had shown discomfort in the moment, was recognized for his integrity in raising concerns after the fact. Beyond internal changes, the airline's swift corrective actions paradoxically earned it grudging respect from veterans and customers alike, who saw in this response a rare example of corporate responsibility moving beyond profit margins and policy fine print. Yet, the true victory lay in what Colonel Callahan experienced, arriving at the White House event with his dignity intact, a quiet but powerful testament to the enduring value of honor in a world too often driven by efficiency and automation. Tom never spoke of the incident to his granddaughter, shielding her from the sting of the day's indignities, but the transformation it sparked within the airline stood as a beacon, proof that even the most impersonal systems could be changed by courage, by a single phone call, and by the intervention of those who choose to stand for what is right. The hero's journey did not end at the airport. It continued onward, shaping a legacy of respect that would ripple forward, ensuring that heroes would always fly not just first class in seat, but first in honor.